Okay, I think we'll get going now. So good morning. This is Dale Hyde from Frontier Technology. I'm sitting here very pleased that we made this a webinar rather than a physical event. Otherwise, I suspect we might not have had such a good turnout. So thanks for joining us on this session. We're going to be looking at automated continuous security validation, and I'm joined today by one of our partners, Josh Deuce from Cloud Distribution. Cloud are one of the UK distributors for many innovative network and cybersecurity vendors, one of which we'll be showcasing today. I'll let Josh introduce himself properly in a moment, but first, I saw I think about 80% actually of the registrations for this event have come from people who aren't currently clients of Frontier Technology. So I'd like to spend just 2 minutes telling you quickly a little bit more about who we are and what we do. So Frontier was founded 16 years ago, initially as a solutions provider and consultancy focused on Microsoft, VMware, and Citrix technologies. Within a couple of years, we had developed our first managed services, initially business continuity as a service, quickly followed by hosting, backup and archive, monitoring, patching, all delivered as a service to complement our existing on-premise solutions. As you can see from this slide, we've also become certified to the key ISO standards during this time. And last year, we introduced our latest managed service penetration testing. And today's session will describe the technology used to provide this service, which can also be deployed by you as an in-house solution as well as a managed service. Obviously, if you're interested in finding out any more about any of these services, please get in touch and we'll tell you more. And here's just a quick reminder: these are the key managed services that we provide at Frontier Technology. But today, our focus is on the provision of data security and data management solutions delivered both as a service and on-prem. Now, to help articulate and facilitate that, a couple of years ago, one of our consultants came up with the idea. He said, well, basically, these are the sort of things we do. We operate on a sort of framework with about 10 elements, which you can see just listed here. And this is what we do to help identify gaps in people's security provision, and basically help develop remediation plans, etc., for them. So we developed this about 2 years ago, and every engagement we have with clients is pretty much driven around this framework. So that's everything we do today, from kind of perimeter and zero trust security, through privilege management, infrastructure deployment, security validation, end user access, and even sort of cyber awareness education for end users. They all fit somewhere onto this framework. Now, we're not going to go into depth on this today, but if you'd like to know more about how we can use this framework to help find and prioritize continuous improvements within your organizations, please get in touch or leave a comment in the chat box. So that's enough about us for now. I'm going to hand over to Josh, who's going to talk about the continuous security validation and automated pen testing, followed by a short, but I think very effective demo. If you've got any questions during the session, just pop them in the chat box and we'll try and address as many of those as we can at the end. Okay, thanks. Josh, on to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Dale. Just flashed my screen up. Bear with me. So today, as Dale mentioned, we're going to talk about Pcysys automated penetration testing platform. Essentially, the deck that I'm going to run through here will give you kind of an overview to the solution, talk about where it kind of fits in the marketplace, the kind of challenges that it addresses. We'll talk about the features of that solution, the USPs, how it operates, how it's deployed, and then, as Dale said, we've got a little 5-minute demonstration video towards the end as well. So the first thing that we kind of look at is why the need for this sort of tool in the market. Why would you be interested in automated pen testing? Well, the thing that we find when talking to our customers is that everyone in cybersecurity kind of feels that they're faced with a bit of an unfair challenge in that it's difficult for you to know whether all of the tools in your network are actually working as they should be, often until it's too late. A breach has happened, the event's taken place, suddenly there's an issue for you to kind of try and mitigate. But we spend lots of money on cybersecurity tools and processes. We need to check that they're working properly. Every day we're faced with new vulnerabilities, new threats, new exploits, new attackers. We need to know whether our network is safe against those threats and those attackers on a consistent, continuous basis. I'm getting some feedback on this. Are you all right to mute yourself, Dale? I don't know if it's coming through yours. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I am muted actually.
Okay, not sure where that's coming from. Anyway, I'll continue anyway. So if we look at kind of the business need for this, every organization has assets, things that they need to protect. You need to know whether your organization is protected, whether the tools on your network are actually doing what they are set out to do, whether there's any vulnerabilities on your network. If so, what sort of threats, what type of attackers are out there that could exploit those vulnerabilities and allow someone to gain access to your assets. And in the middle of that triage, you've got your risk as an organization. Penetration testing will highlight where this risk sits. So you'll be actively testing whether the controls on your network are protecting those assets. If there's any vulnerabilities on your network, you'll expose them. You will find out where they sit and what sort of threats are out there. What exploits could an attacker use to exploit those vulnerabilities and gain access to your assets? So penetration testing as a concept and as a process highlights where your risk is as an organization. If we look at what other tools are out there to validate your security posture and give you the same kind of insight as to where this risk lies, the most typical one that we see in the market, the one that's kind of been around for the longest and is mature in terms of a tool and a product, is vulnerability scanning. Great if you're using one of these, it's good practice. Most kind of certifications and certification bodies will require you to have a vulnerability scanning tool on your network. Whilst they're useful in that they're an automated software solution and you can run them whenever you want, they kind of only really give you a baseline. So they shine a light on the possible problems without really much more context other than there's a potential problem there. They won't necessarily look to test the human factor, i.e., okay, there's a vulnerability here, but if it's exploited, can I do anything with it? Can that lead me to be able to sniff credentials on a network, crack passwords, escalate privilege, move through the network as an attacker would? You don't necessarily get that level of context with a vulnerability scanning tool. The other issue with them, this graph was taken from Gartner from a few years back. What it essentially shows is that at the time there were around 15,000 vulnerabilities confirmed, known in the market, that didn't have an active exploit linked to them. We'd seen no evidence of that exploit actually being, that vulnerability actually being exploited in the wild by an attacker. So what you're left with is these vulnerability scanning tools giving you a long list of reports of all the potential problems on a network, but actually only 5% of those vulnerabilities can really have any impact on you or have been proven to have any impact on you as an organization. So if you're giving a long list of vulnerabilities from a Qualys or a Nessus or a Rapid7 tool, how do you know what vulnerabilities within that list are the 5% that you actually need to look at and to safeguard against? The other issue with vulnerability scanning tools is that they're graded according to a framework called Pcysys, which is a little bit outdated these days. It doesn't necessarily show you, it grades vulnerabilities in terms of criticality, so high, medium, and low, and it assigns them a number based on that. That doesn't take into context whether the actual vulnerability can be exploited. It doesn't then show you what the impact of an exploit of that vulnerability will be. This will make a little bit more sense when I run through the Pcysys demo towards the end, but what we show is if a vulnerability is found, can it be exploited and where does that lead us to in the network? You won't get that with a scanner alone. It will just scan your network and look for what we call static vulnerabilities, i.e. this server's outdated or unpatched. This OS needs updating on this particular endpoint. With Pcysys, you get more context because not only do we find the vulnerability, we exploit it and show you where that leads, and then we look for those dynamic vulnerabilities. Can I crack user passwords? Can I escalate privilege through the network and move laterally, much like an attacker would? And as I say, that will make a bit more sense in the demo video very shortly. Look then at penetration testing as a concept. Traditionally, this is a process carried out by third-party consultants on a network. They'll come to your organization, they will look to actively penetrate it, see where they can get to, what they can do, and show you then, therefore, what the impact of an attacker going down that same path would be. They'll hunt for a vulnerability, they'll find it, they'll look to exploit it, they'll then move through the network as an attacker would to give you far more perspective of what could actually happen on your network if an attacker were to find this particular problem. So you're getting far more context and depth than a vulnerability scanning tool alone, because you're being shown what the impact of an exploit of that vulnerability would be, not just where the vulnerabilities are. The problem with penetration testing as a manual process carried out by third-party consultants is that it simply just doesn't scale very well into the enterprise space. At first, you're looking at a high expense. Often it's between £1,000 and £2,000 per day per tester, with scopes sometimes taking 3 to 4 weeks Costs can ramp up very, very quickly with manual pen testing. You're then spending a lot of money on something where you are dependent on the talent of that particular person on that particular day. And the performance of that person on that particular day may differ from one day to the next. I've spoken to customers who've said with our old pen test, when we used to do it manually, we had our first one done 18 months ago. We used the same company the next year because we liked the results we got the first time, but we had a different tester the year following, and he didn't find things that weren't fixed from the previous test. Just goes to show that as with anything where you're reliant on the performance of humans, that's going to lead to inconsistencies in itself. But the biggest problem with manual pen testing is that it shows a point in time snapshot of what your vulnerabilities and weaknesses look like on that particular day. If, say, you had a penetration test done today in March, and in April you hired new employees to your organization, you made some reconfigurations, you added some new elements to the network, suddenly in April there would be potential holes that weren't there when the pen test was done in March. Therefore, it's not even necessarily the fault of that pen tester, but there are problems now a month down the line that weren't there and couldn't have been found when the pen test was done. Therefore, you can't necessarily rely solely on the report that was generated by that pen test. Hence the move to need to a more continuous, consistent model, which is what Pcysys allows for. So the Pcysys platform, as we mentioned, it's an automated penetration testing platform. It's unique in that it's the only automated pen testing tool on the market. The platform that Pcysys have developed is called Pentera. The way in which Pentera operates we'll go through in a sec. On the right hand side, these are the processes essentially that it will carry out once you deploy it and once you configure a pen test run to start. Every exploit that we use is mapped to the MITRE framework. For those that haven't heard of the MITRE framework, it's essentially what every pen tester will use. Every exploit has a particular code assigned to it and a reference assigned to it. So we'll be able to show we did this, and this is where it maps to on the MITRE framework. This is the impact, and this is how you fix what we did. You deploy this solution to a dedicated machine within your infrastructure. So that can be on a physical machine, which is kind of the recommendation that we advise, because the reason for that, we say to put it on a machine with a particularly powerful GPU. The tool will utilize that GPU to crack passwords very, very quickly. You can, if you wish, put it on a VM, a virtual instance. You may then slow down some of the password performing functionality, but it absolutely can be done. Hardware or physical, put it onto a dedicated machine within your infrastructure, and you license it for the number of IPs in your organization. So hypothetically, you might have 1,000 IP license on a 3-year subscription. That would enable you to run a penetration test against those 1,000 IPs every single day for that 3 years. There's no limitation on how often you can run it on the IPs within your network. Once you do deploy it and essentially press play, these are the steps that it will go through. So the first two, exactly the same as a vulnerability scanner, will perform reconnaissance on your network, work out what's within this IP range, where are those IPs vulnerable, and then we won't just stop there like a vulnerability scanning tool. That's where they would stop and just give you your list, your report of all of the problems. We then look to go further and say, okay, we found some vulnerabilities. Let's automatically exploit those vulnerabilities and see where that leads us. So now we're going to start looking at dynamic problems. Can we sniff user credentials on this network? Once we pick them up, can we crack the passwords of those users? If we can't crack their passwords, can we relay their username and hash around the network, conduct a pass the ticket attack, and see if we can gather any more information that way? Can we inject malware, or does your antivirus block? I say malware, it's payloads designed to look like malware to stress test your antivirus. If your AV blocks us, fantastic. It means that your AV is doing what it should be doing. It's configured properly and it's not an issue to worry about. We validate what's working well as where there's room for improvement. If it doesn't block us, that will then point to either a deficiency within the AV tool that you're using, or perhaps a configuration on the particular device that the AV didn't block the payload on. We'll then look to move laterally through the network and aim to escalate privilege up to domain admin level, much like an attacker would if they came to your network, or much like a pen tester would if they're running a pen test on your environment. Idea being, of course, if someone gets to domain admin, they essentially own the network and they can do what they like. At each point, we will show you what we did, the vulnerability that we found, the method that we used to exploit that vulnerability, and where that led us to on the network, as well as then showing you what are the fixes that will give you the biggest impact. What are the fixes that if you prioritize these first, you will remediate the most attacker paths, if you like, and block off the most paths for an attacker. So I'll talk a bit about the features just before we get into the product demo. A big feature of this is that it's a completely agentless tool. As I said, you put this onto one dedicated machine within your infrastructure, then you press play and away you go. It's a quick bit of config to do, but you don't need to roll out agents to every endpoint. You don't then need to maintain these agents once deployed. We remove that headache entirely. It's a plug and play solution. Once to run as well as the default mode, which is a black box test, whereby no information is given to the organization or the attacker, sorry, before the run is beginning. In a black box test, the Pcysys machine has to work out who's on the network, what does this network look like, what sort of machines are here, and where are they vulnerable. So a black box is essentially working in the same way that an attacker would on your network. You can run this in a grey box mode, whereby you can give it usernames and credentials of a particular person within your organization and say, okay, what happens if this person gets compromised, or they click on a phishing link, what would the impact of that be? Alternatively, you can flip it on its head and say, okay, we're going to give it an endpoint to go after. We're going to establish what a critical asset on our network, and give Pcysys the keyword of that asset, of that file. See if it can hunt and gain access to that asset, and if so, demonstrate how it got there, what it did, and what you need to block, what vulnerabilities you need to remediate to stop an attacker going down that same path. So you can run completely kind of black box tests whereby the attacker has no information prior to getting on the network, or you can run some kind of guided bespoke ad hoc scenarios, all included within the subscription price. There's nothing additional, no kind of extra modules or anything like that. Everything within this platform is designed to be completely safe and controlled, so it wouldn't be a particularly good business model for Pcysys if they were taking networks offline. There's been no reports of that within any of our customers globally. We're about 130 customers across the planet now. Everything within this tool, every exploit that's been written in, is designed by Pcysys' R&D team. It's made up of pen testers to be completely safe. So essentially, when they're putting exploits into this tool, they find an exploit, they work out what makes that exploit malicious, reverse engineer it, remove the malicious element, then write it into the platform. Only when it's deemed to be safe does it go into the platform, and this tool will never run an exploit if it doesn't deem it to be safe. If you have certain tools or protocols within your environment that you're worried about, let's say you had a NAC solution that was going to quarantine devices if it felt they were being brute forced, you can put extra security measures in place to say, don't run this particular exploit without my permission. If the Pcysys machine finds the ability to run that particular exploit, it will flag to you saying, this is what I want to do. This is the IP that I want to do it to. Are you happy with this? Yes or no? So you get an element of control over what happens during the pen test run, and we ensure that you're comfortable and in control of everything that's going on. With the Pcysys tool, this isn't a simulation platform. You may have come across other breach and attack simulation players in the market. What this particular tool does is show you what the vulnerabilities are within your network that can actually impact you. And the way that it shows you is by finding those vulnerabilities, running an exploit against them, and showing you where that leads an attacker. Therefore, if Pcysys shows that we were able to sniff this user's credentials, crack his passwords, open a remote session, and eventually get to domain admin, that's not saying this might be possible on your network. It's saying it is, and this is the route that we took to get there. Therefore, you need to put these fixes in place to show it. Essentially, what that leads to is far less far less false positives than those vulnerability scanning tools or simulation tools. We're showing what the real problems are within a network. Whenever we get somewhere, we'll show you exactly how we got there, the attack vector, how the attack played out, the vulnerability that we found, how we exploited it, where that led us to, and what the impact could be, as well as then how you fix all of that. A couple more slides before I get to the demo, but the R&D team within Pcysys is made up of some of the best pen testers from the Israeli military. So it's an Israeli vendor founded by a man who headed up a team of pen testers for the Israeli military for 10 years. A lot of the guys in his R&D team are his old colleagues from Special Forces. So you've got manual penetration testers looking for exploits that are being used out there in the wild. As I said, reverse engineering them, making them safe, and then updating them to the platform. There's tools updated every 3 to 4 weeks on average, so you stay fresh and relevant with what's going on out there in the wild, if you like. And then when the test run is finished, you get instant access to the reports. Those of you listening who carry out manual penetration testing, the average that I speak to customers is 2 to 3 weeks to wait for your report to be written up and given back to you, by which time things could have changed on your network that have led to new issues coming up. With this tool, you press a button, you get the reports, it's all there, it's downloaded for you in a nice glossy format, which we'll run through a little bit more in the demo now. Okay, so now we're going to show how simple and easy it is to run a pen test with Pcysys. Essentially give you a demonstration of the product in action, watch a pen test play out once we've configured and set up a run, but kind of walk you through the interface as we do so. So the first thing that you do when you deploy Pentair is you set up a template for the IP range that you want it to attack. You define that IP range once you've given your template a name and selected what type of attack you want to run. You then define the range you want it to go after, both your on-premise and AWS hosted IPs, and select any IPs that you want to exclude from that range. Select the duration of time you want it to run for. Define how noisy or stealthy do you want it to be. If it's noisy, hopefully your security tools and products will pick up on it. If it's stealthy, it will aim to emulate a real hacker and take its time a bit more. Then set up whether you want it to ask for your permission before running any particular exploits. And lastly, schedule how frequently you want that attack to be carried out. Pick a day, a time, and schedule it for a weekly or a monthly basis. You can then begin the run. The first thing we'll see is the timer start ticking along top right as the machine discovers what's on the network and enumerates the machines it finds. So what are these machines within this range? What are they doing? What OSs are they running? And immediately then, where are they vulnerable? And as we find these vulnerabilities, we'll grade them for you, but simultaneously we'll look to then go further than just finding the vulnerabilities, we'll exploit them. We'll show what the impact of an exploit could be on this network. So simultaneously, we'll get some achievements on the right-hand side here as well. Already here we've sniffed some user credentials in the network, cracked some passwords of those users, validated them against the domain controller, and here within 4 minutes the machine has domain access on this particular network. So if it's an attacker now, it owns the network. We don't stop there though. Just because we've got to that 10 out of 10, we don't finish. We want to say, okay, what else can we find? What else could we do? What other exploits could we run if we were an attacker looking to exploit this network? So we've now got the approvals boxes here. It's 48 approvals waiting to happen. Even though we've got to that 10 out of 10, we want to keep going, and we can say, okay, in this instance, I give you permission to run these payloads, inject these payloads, see if you can get past Moby and see what the impact would be. We're not going to approve anything for now. We just tick what we're happy with and leave what we're not comfortable with for the moment. We can then click into any of these achievements on the right-hand side and get an insight as to, okay, what actually happened here? How did we get to domain admin? We click this and we get to see step by step everything that the machine did, every vulnerability that it found, every exploit it carried out, every step that it took to get to that particular achievement, as well as the insight on what that achievement means to your organization. And when we jump into the vulnerabilities in a sec, we'll see how we fix them. So here we picked up the username and hash, and we then cracked the hash of that user because his password wasn't very strong. If we jump further up, we can say, okay, what was the root cause of all of this? How did it happen? In this instance, a network misconfiguration was in place. So the LLMNR protocol, for those of you who haven't heard of it, it's essentially a legacy Windows protocol whereby if I can't find something on the network, if there's a 404 not found or I can't reach a certain asset, my machine will broadcast out to the network saying, I can't find this, does anyone have it? At which point, an attacker can intercept that communication, gather the username and creds of that particular machine that's broadcasted out, and then use those credentials, try and crack those credentials or relay those credentials, use it to the attacker's advantage. So we give you a little bit of insight as to what the particular problem was here, as well as a brief overview of how to remediate against that problem. But if we say, okay, well, I want to know in depth how this occurred and how I fix it. If we click on to get the detailed remediation advice, we'll get far more insight in terms of a technical overview of exactly what the problem was here, a more in-depth overview than the one I just gave. And we will then get step-by-step advice on how to fix this particular issue, i.e. go here, click this, turn this off, run this, really lay it out for you nice and simply so that anyone really could conduct that remediation piece. So we like to break things down for you and make it as simple as possible and say, if you fix the problem here at the root cause, if you focus on this vulnerability that can impact you, you're going to have more impact in terms of stopping an attacker going down multiple paths. We then show in this window here, as I alluded to earlier, we can start on the local network. You can also point this at machines that you've got hosted in AWS or Azure, or any cloud instance, Google Cloud, and we can start on the local network, pick up credentials of you and users of people on your network. But if we can find them, gather access to access of login credentials for users who have access into those cloud hosted IPs. So we can make that hop to stuff that you've got hosted in the cloud. We then jump into the reporting functionality of Pcysys. Once we finish the attack, you get access to several different types of reports. The first one here is the full action report. So this is going to show you everything that the machine attempted to do, as well as a breakdown of whether that particular action was a success or not. So this tool isn't just about showing you where there's weaknesses on your network, where there's room for improvement, or where there's problems. We also want to show you what are the things that are working well. If, for example, we failed in every attempt to inject a payload to a device, your AV blocked us. Great. That means for you, your AV is configured properly, it's doing what it should be doing, it's in place and working as you want it to. If, on the other hand, we cracked every password of every user that we picked up, we obviously highlight that there's a problem with your password policy. We can pinpoint what's good, what's working well as what isn't, and then give you advice on how to fix what isn't working so well, so that you become more secure over time. This report, every action that we try and take is time-stamped, so you can pull all of these into a seam, correlate the logs as to whether your seam picked it up, whether your other security tools picked it up, and everything there is mapped to the MITRE framework, as I mentioned earlier. We then jump into the full summary reports. We'll give you a breakdown of how you performed in each of these sections, whether there was too many privileged users, whether it's too easy to sniff credentials, crack passwords, move laterally, inject payloads, exploit files, whether there's too many critical static vulnerabilities on your network, and whether it's too easy for an attacker to access data. We'll also then show, okay, well, there's a lot of stuff that we just highlighted there, I know it's high level, but there's a lot of different areas where there could be problems. We'll show you what are the top 3 things that if you just focus on these as a matter of priority, you fix these particular vulnerabilities, these are going to give you the biggest impact the most quickly. Therefore showing you, okay, this is what I'll focus on first. I'll worry about fixing these problems, then I'll go and deal with everything else that was found on my organization. Fix the things that are going to give you the biggest impact most quickly. We then run through all of the vulnerabilities that were found, as well as sort of insight as to which particular hosts were affected by these vulnerabilities. And of course, there's remediation advice on all of them. What achievements were carried out, what devices were picked up, of which how many were vulnerable, where they sit in the network, what types of devices are they. We'll also then show you how your passwords performed, which ones were cracked, which ones weren't, what were the users that were cracked, where do they sit in the network, who are they, and where are they sitting, what's the impact of them having a weak password. All of this can be customized, so you can add particular attack vectors to the report on particular users, groups of users, domains. And we also have this high-level exec report. So a lot of the customer feedback that we got was, look, all of that information that we just went through is fantastic. All of that detail, all of that insight is invaluable to me. What I also need is a way of showing the organization, the stakeholders, the C-level, the execs, the people that don't know what I'm talking about. If I start mentioning IPs and domains, I need to show them how we're performing, how we're improving, and how can we track that performance, i.e. if after 6 months of using this tool we're faring really well, we can show you this particular this window here to say, okay, well, if there's a drop in performance, we'll pinpoint to you why, how you fix it, and how you get yourself back up to those sort of high scoring runs. So not just about showing where you are now, but taking you on that journey of helping you to become more secure over a longer period of time and addressing any problems as and when they come up, as and when you're running Pcysys scans. NHS were the first to deploy this in the UK. They essentially found that half an hour of running this tool during a POC, they found more than 3 human pen testers had during a 9-day pen testing project that was commissioned the month prior to us coming in and doing proof of concept. It picked up more user credentials, it found more vulnerabilities, it carried out more achievements than 3 guys had during essentially 27 working days of manpower. These are some of the global alliances that we have. So some of these vendors, obviously some of the biggest names in cybersecurity, are actually utilizing the Pcysys platform to protect their own physical infrastructure. And if we look at some of the sample customers that we've, Blackstone obviously being probably the biggest name here, the 3rd largest investment company in the world. We've got the likes of BNP Paribas on board using this tool. A raft of different organizations within a raft of different verticals who are all utilizing Pcysys to validate their security posture, know where the weaknesses are, and make improvements on those weaknesses to become more secure. So if we look to summarize then, Pantera will allow you to focus on the 5% of vulnerabilities that are actually breachable. Focus on the problems that can cause you an impact, that can actually be exploited and cause you any harm. In being able to run this platform, you're essentially using an automated red team. This tool will constantly look for issues within your environment and flag them to you as and when it finds them. The beauty of it is you don't need to be a penetration tester to run this platform. You can run it every day with a basic background in IT. It's going to reduce the amount of time that it takes for new vulnerabilities to be detected, because you're looking at this on a more continuous basis. It's not an annual or a monthly penetration test. You can run this daily, you can run this weekly, however often you see value in. You can run a Pcysys tool. You can do it ad hoc if you know there's a change to your network or something new goes live. Whenever you want, you can have an understanding of what your cybersecurity hygiene looks like. This platform, unlike vulnerability scanners, is going to look for vulnerabilities caused by deficiencies in configuration. So it might be, and we've seen in proof of concepts with our customers, that you might have an AV tool that's really good and it blocks payloads in everywhere that we attempt to, other than perhaps there's a config issue on one particular device that allows a payload through. Suddenly then, if that's an attacker, they've got past that fence in your network, if you like. This tool will point out those deficiencies. It's testing the tools that are put in place on your organization to make sure they're doing the job that you put them on, that you installed them to do. And of course, the purpose of this is to enable you to be able to report consistently on your cybersecurity posture, know where you're strong, know where you're weak, be able to justify investments in those weak areas, because you can show what the impact of not investing time or resource or financial money into fixing those particular problems. You're going to be given that insight on what the impact would be. So that's a high level overview of what this does. I'll hand back to Dale to off, but if anyone's got any questions on this tool, feel free to get in touch following this with you.
Okay, so yeah, thanks Josh, as always. A nice accomplished presentation. So yeah, as Josh said, if you've got any questions, please post them now and we'll try and cover them in a couple of minutes. I can see a handful down there, and Josh, perhaps you can take a look now to see if you can see any as well. Okay, so I just wanted to wrap things up really by talking quickly about deployment options. As I alluded to earlier, we offer both an in-house deployed and managed option. Basically, you buy your own subscription and manage that yourselves. That's probably best for larger organisations, those that have got their own red teams who want to be able to run the tests on a regular schedule or indeed on demand. We also offer this as a managed service, which would probably be more attractive for organisations without the appropriate resource that maybe want to run monthly or quarterly tests. The managed service is inclusive of setup for devices that are in scope, the hardware or compute resource required to run the service, an annual fully managed and guided test, which includes planning, execution, an executive summary report, detailed technical report, expert analysis, results presentation, and a roundtable or discussion forum. Plus, on top of that full annual test, the service also includes a monthly unguided automated test, much like Josh has just demonstrated, plus the executive summary and detailed technical reports. And that's our standard SLA, but other options such as doing a quarterly or monthly fully guided managed tests can also be offered, so we can tailor the offering to suit your actual requirements. That's pretty much the end of what we plan to cover. One I think I have to say, in terms of next steps and things, if this is something you're interested in taking a closer look at, we can do a proof of concepts quite easily with this. It's a fairly easy tool to put out there, deploy and do a POC on. There are some certain things we need to know about your network, about your plans, etc. To qualify for having a full POC done. But that certainly often would be the next step. Perhaps after an initial discussion about what you're actually looking to achieve. And we can also forward on, we've got industry case studies now in most industries, so we can forward on some case studies as well if you want to. So I think at that point, I'll just go on to some of the questions. Josh, I don't know if you've had a chance to have a look yourself yet, but I've got a few here. Someone just said that we mentioned CVVS earlier, and also, there's a scoring system for the achievements that the test, when the test is running. Can those be customised at all to fit I suppose somebody's own internal objectives?
Yeah, so it's actually a feature of version 4, which goes live on the 1st of April. So the interface that we ran through today is version 3.6, I believe. Version 4 goes live in a couple of weeks, and that's one of the features of that. So CVSS for the vulnerabilities, those are kind of locked in because it is graded according to CVSS. But the achievements piece, that can be customized. You can add your own weighting to, if you think, I don't know, if Pcysys deems something to be a 7 and actually you're more concerned about it, you deem it to be a 9 and you want to eradicate that problem from your environment, you can customize the weighting of that, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. So Josh, next one, I think I can probably answer this one myself actually, although Josh, if you've got any further thoughts on it, please feel free to say so. You mentioned towards the beginning again about vulnerability scans, and effectively one of the first steps that Pcysys does is perform a vulnerability scan. Question I've got here is about somebody that said, look, we've got a pretty sizable investment in Qualys. Do you think that could replace that? And I think with organisations that have sizable investments in vulnerability scanning tools like Qualys or Tenable, Rapid7, etc., I think our answer to that is probably not. That's something that you say you made an investment, you've got resource there that understand those tools, etc. So we're probably not looking to replace those in those circumstances. However, for smaller organisations, maybe that haven't made that sort of investment, probably the vulnerability scan that Pcysys performs will probably be plenty good enough. And as I think Josh said, we also very much focus on those exploitable vulnerabilities. So I think that probably answers that. Josh, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say the same. There's some of our customers are using both in tandem, whereby they have invested in a particular team to run their vulnerability scanning and more so the patching of vulnerabilities off the back of it. For some of our smaller organizations or customers that have come on board, they've felt the need to completely replace those vulnerability scanning tools because they feel that this gives them more insight and context over what's happening.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, next one. Now this one, I've seen this question a few times before. It's about the malware injection, or as I think you said, something that's designed to look like malware. This just says, can we expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so essentially they're harmless payloads that your AV should block it really. And if your AV doesn't block it, then that flags to a problem within that. But there's nothing actually malicious within the file that's injected. It's just dressed up to look like malware so that your tools, to validate whether your tools are working properly without, of course, causing any harm.
Okay, thanks. This one, I think you actually pretty much did answer this. Maybe the question was posted beforehand, but it just says here, I haven't heard of Pcysys. Who are they? Yeah, I think you did answer that to some degree. Any more you can add?
Yeah, so they've been around. First customer in the UK was in May 2018. They were set up by a man called Eric Leveson, who headed up the red team of penetration testers for the Israeli military for about 10 years. Worked out how to formulate the pen tests that they were doing on their infrastructure into a software platform, and that's kind of how Pcysys grew and developed. They were in stealth for a few years before going live, but yeah, they're a relatively new vendor to the market, I suppose, in cybersecurity space, but over 120 customers globally in under 2 years. So they're growing very, very quickly.
Yeah. Okay, and I've only got one more that I can actually see here. Don't know if you can see anything else at your end, but this is a question about the license model. Basically, it's licensed on the number of IPs that you want to have in scope in your system. So we typically find at the smaller end of the market that will be a few hundred IPs. At the larger end, probably tens of thousands. Probably wouldn't want to say much more than that. Obviously, each situation's a little bit different, and there's also this on-premise deployment approach or managed service approach. But yeah, I'll get back to you individually on that one to go for a bit more detail. But again, if anybody wants to have a little bit more information on the investment required to deploy a system like this, let us know. So Josh, there as well. Anything else you can see at your end?
I can see there's a question on IP range versus live IPs. So someone's asked, for the IP license, is that every IP in a range or only for live IPs? Answer to that is essentially live IPs. So if you had a range of hundreds of thousands, but you're only using 2,000 live IPs, it's the 2,000 that we'd be looking at. If you only saw benefit, if let's say you had 2,000 IPs, but you only really regarded 500 of those to be critical infrastructure, you can look to just license that 500 as well. It's kind of up to you. Our recommendation is that you're going to get more value the more IPs you include in scope, because you're looking at how those machines communicate with each other, whether there's any particular issues, as I mentioned, such as like password cracking on a particular device. If that device isn't included in scope, you may not get visibility of that. But yes, in short, the answer is live IPs rather than every IP in your range.
Okay, any more?
That's all I can see at the moment. Let's just click through and see if there's any more that have come up. No, I think that's everything.
Okay, well, thanks for doing that again, Josh. Really appreciated as always. Thanks to those attendees. I hope that was useful for you. And yeah, if you get any questions in the meantime, drop us a line, and hopefully hear from you soon. Okay, thanks all, and I think we're finishing just about on time. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye bye.